The ships were dying beneath Japanese waters. Something invisible stalked the maritime highways that connected Japan's scattered islands. Naval observers at coastal stations recorded losses that defied explanation. No enemy aircraft appeared overhead during daylight hours. No submarine periscopes broke the surface. No torpedo wakes streaked toward their targets. Yet merchant vessels continued exploding in waters previously considered safe. What these observers witnessed represented warfare's new face. Silent death dropped from bombers flying precise patterns through darkness. The weapons lay dormant on seafloors until ships passed overhead. Then steel hulls split apart. Cargo holds flooded. Thousands of tons of rice and coal vanished beneath the waves. This invisible enemy had been delivered by Boeing B29 Superfortresses. The giant bombers carried payloads different from their usual incendiary loads. Instead of firebombs, they dropped sophisticated mines equipped with multiple trigger mechanisms. These devices transformed Japan's own territorial waters into hunting grounds for mechanical predators. The campaign began during late March 1945. American military planners had identified Japan's critical weakness. As an island nation, Japan imported nearly everything needed for survival. Oil came from overseas sources. Food arrived by ship from Korea and Manchuria. Raw materials crossed the Pacific in merchant holds. Cutting these supply lines would strangle Japan more effectively than bombing cities. The mathematics were compelling. One strategically placed mine could sink multiple vessels. Each ship lost represented thousands of tons of vital supplies removed from Japan's war economy. Admiral Chester Nimitz had advocated aerial mining for months. His naval officers understood what Army Air Force commanders initially resisted. Japan's geography made her vulnerable to maritime blockade. Mines offered advantages that submarines and surface vessels couldn't match. The technology impressed even American engineers. Magnetic sensors detected steel hulls passing overhead. Acoustic triggers responded to engine noise and propeller sounds. Pressure devices felt water displacement as ships moved through their detection zones. Some mines combined all three sensing methods. The most sophisticated devices counted ships before exploding. A mine might ignore 5 vessels, then destroy the 6th. Others waited days or weeks before arming themselves. This randomness made every voyage unpredictable. Japanese merchant captains never knew which trip might be their last. B-29 crews flew these missions at moderate altitudes. Between 5,000 and 8,000 feet provided accuracy for mine placement while staying above most anti-aircraft fire. Advanced radar systems allowed precision drops even during overcast nights. Japanese coastal observers couldn't understand how Americans achieved such accuracy in darkness. The first devastating results appeared quickly. Within days of the initial mining runs, shipping through critical straits declined dramatically. The Shimonoseki Strait, connecting the Sea of Japan to the Inland Sea, became a maritime graveyard. Vessels that had made routine passages for decades now exploded without warning. Japanese naval records captured after the war revealed the scope of the catastrophe. March shipping totaled 545,000 tons through major ports. April dropped to 381,000 tons. May saw only 209,000 tons move. June managed barely 98,000 tons. Each declining number represented food removed from civilian tables and coal denied to factories. The psychological impact proved as devastating as the physical losses. Merchant crews understood they faced invisible death on every voyage. Ship captains refused to leave port. Those who sailed often jumped ship at the first opportunity. Harbor masters watched vessels accumulate in anchorages while their crews deserted. Japan's mine-sweeping forces initially approached the crisis with confidence. Captain Tamura commanded 349 vessels and 20,000 trained personnel dedicated to clearing underwater obstacles. These forces had extensive experience with conventional mines. But American weapons operated beyond Japanese capabilities. Standard magnetic sweeps reached only 10 meters above the seabed. American mines could detonate at much greater depths. Traditional acoustic countermeasures consisted of simple noisemakers. Sophisticated American sensors ignored these primitive attempts at deception. Japanese sweepers found themselves helplessly outmatched by superior technology. The weapons demonstrated frightening intelligence. Some devices learned from failed sweeping attempts. Others activated only after multiple ships passed overhead. Channels declared safe became death traps hours later. Japanese mine warfare experts realized they faced weapons that thought. Industrial consequences cascaded throughout Japan's economy. The Yawata Steelworks, the nation's largest steel producer, cut production by 85%. Not from bombing damage, but from lack of coal and iron ore. Furnaces went cold. Workers received dismissal notices. The facility that had produced steel for battleships now stood silent. Transportation networks collapsed as coal shortages spread. Railroad locomotives began burning furniture and books when coal shipments stopped. Temple gates fed steam engines desperate for fuel. Electric power plants shut down entire prefectures. Factories that had operated 3 shifts now opened once weekly when coal arrived. Food distribution suffered complete breakdown. Rice existed in agricultural areas but couldn't reach cities. Ships refused to transport cargo through mined waters. Tokyo's population waited in lines for rations that never came. Citizens traded family treasures for sweet potatoes. Children fainted from hunger during school lessons. Medical facilities faced critical shortages. Pharmaceutical plants couldn't receive raw materials. Hospitals performed surgery without anesthetics. Patients died from infections that simple medicines would have cured. No ships carried medical supplies through the deadly waters. Korea, Japan's agricultural lifeline, became unreachable. The ports handling Korean rice shipments were systematically mined. Vessels that had made routine runs between Korea and Japan now rusted in harbors. The Korean Strait traffic dropped from 50 ships daily to 3 or 4 wooden boats. Manchuria's resources became equally inaccessible. Iron ore, coal, and soybeans accumulated in warehouses while Japan starved. The port of Dairen processed only 12,000 tons in July compared to 380,000 tons the previous year. Mountains of materials sat useless because ships wouldn't come. Japanese submarine forces found themselves imprisoned in home ports. The legendary I-58 spent months trapped in harbor while her captain studied mine charts. Vice Admiral Takagi reported that submarines couldn't deploy through minefields. America had turned Japanese naval bases into prisons. The battleship Yamato's final sortie demonstrated mining's indirect impact. Forced to use alternative routes to avoid mines, Yamato exposed herself to carrier reconnaissance. This led directly to her destruction by aircraft that might never have found her through safer passages. Aircraft production collapsed as aluminum supplies from Manchuria disappeared. Tank manufacturing ceased entirely when copper and lead shipments stopped. Even basic ammunition became scarce. The Japanese war machine ground to a halt, not from direct attack, but from resource starvation. Fishing communities faced particular hardship. Vessels designed for catching food triggered mines meant for warships. Engine sounds that attracted fish also attracted acoustic mines. Fishing families watched their boats explode in waters they had worked for generations. Coastal populations lost their primary protein source. The human cost mounted steadily. Merchant marine casualties exceeded 25,000 dead. These represented Japan's most experienced sailors, men who understood coastal navigation and weather patterns. Their loss couldn't be replaced. Remaining ships sailed with teenage crews and elderly volunteers who lacked essential skills. Cultural institutions suffered alongside industrial facilities. Sake production stopped when rice became unavailable for brewing. The Gekkeikan brewery, operating since 1637, shut down after 3 centuries of continuous operation. Traditional festivals canceled when communities lacked food for celebrations. Military preparations for homeland defense crumbled under the mining campaign's impact. Troops couldn't deploy between islands. Ammunition remained stranded in warehouses. Aviation fuel never reached airfields. The vaunted kamikaze program discovered that suicide planes needed fuel to reach their targets. Crack army divisions in China couldn't return to defend Japan. The elite Kwantung Army sat uselessly in Manchuria, while homeland forces prepared for invasion with bamboo spears. Strategic reserves became meaningless when transportation systems failed completely. By summer 1945, Japan faced systematic collapse. Daily life revolved around searching for food. Government employees abandoned offices to hunt for sweet potatoes. School systems closed when students became too weak for lessons. Hospitals discharged patients who couldn't be fed. The efficiency of aerial mining astonished military analysts. While typical bombing raids required 300 aircraft dropping 2,000 tons of explosives to destroy 16 square miles of city, a dozen mine-laying aircraft with 100 tons of weapons could paralyze entire ports for months. American losses remained minimal throughout the campaign. Only 15 B-29s were lost to enemy action during mining missions. This represented less than 1% loss rate compared to over 3% for bombing raids. Each lost bomber had cost Japan roughly 45 ships through successful mining operations. The technology gap proved decisive. Japanese engineers examining recovered mines found sophisticated mechanisms years beyond their capabilities. Magnetic sensors that distinguished between ship types. Acoustic devices immune to countermeasures. Pressure sensors detecting subtle water displacement. Combined trigger systems that required specific conditions for detonation. Ship counting mechanisms particularly frustrated Japanese sweepers. Mines programmed to ignore multiple vessels before exploding made channel clearing impossible. Areas declared safe became killing grounds when the programmed number was reached. Randomness replaced predictability in Japanese coastal navigation. Korean ports presented additional challenges. Mines laid in July 1945 continued claiming victims into the 1950s. Some American weapons from World War II would sink North Korean vessels during the Korean conflict. The persistence of these weapons extended their impact across decades. Weather conditions couldn't protect Japanese shipping. American radar systems worked effectively during storms and overcast conditions. Night provided no sanctuary when electronic navigation allowed precision mine placement. Japanese vessels found themselves vulnerable regardless of sailing conditions. The cascade effect amplified every loss. Each ship destroyed represented not just its cargo, but the cumulative impact on multiple economic sectors. A vessel carrying coal affected power generation, steel production, and transportation simultaneously. Single mine explosions generated multiple shortages throughout Japan's interconnected economy. Japanese military leadership gradually recognized their helplessness. Traditional naval warfare concepts proved inadequate against invisible weapons. Surface combats and submarine attacks could be fought. Mines offered no opponent to engage. They simply waited with mechanical patience until targets appeared. Intelligence services struggled to understand the threat's scope. Many mining losses were attributed to submarines or air attacks. The true extent of aerial mining remained unknown until post-war interrogations revealed American planning documents. Japanese commanders fought an enemy they couldn't accurately assess. Communication between islands became increasingly difficult. Telegraph cables crossed waters now filled with mines. Radio transmissions provided incomplete pictures of shipping losses. Central authorities lost contact with outlying territories as transportation networks collapsed completely. By August 1945, Japan's situation had become hopeless. Industrial production had virtually ceased. Food distribution systems had failed completely. Transportation networks operated sporadically at best. The nation faced mass starvation within months, regardless of military developments. Surrender came before the mining campaign reached its full potential. American planners had prepared additional mining operations that would have made any Japanese shipping impossible. The weapons already deployed had effectively accomplished their mission. Japan could no longer function as a modern nation. Post-war clearing operations revealed the campaign's lasting impact. Japanese minesweepers worked under American supervision to clear their own waters. The task proved extraordinarily dangerous. Delayed arming mechanisms meant mines could explode months after the war ended. Ship-counting devices remained active until their program numbers were reached. Between August 1945 and December 1946, Japanese clearing operations lost 81 vessels and 423 personnel. These men died removing weapons that had already accomplished their strategic purpose. Their sacrifice demonstrated how thoroughly the mining campaign had penetrated Japanese waters. Insurance companies refused to cover vessels in certain areas despite official clearance. Shipping rates remained elevated for years after the war ended. Some remote channels weren't declared completely safe until the 1970s, when modern detection equipment finally located the last hidden weapons. The expertise gained clearing American mines proved valuable during the Korean War. Japanese sweepers secretly deployed to clear Korean waters using skills learned removing their own coastal obstacles. Several vessels and crews were lost in this clandestine operation, their deaths attributed to maritime accidents rather than combat casualties. Operation Starvation revolutionized naval warfare concepts. The precision aerial mining technique became standard doctrine for major navies worldwide. Acoustic, magnetic, and pressure sensing technologies proliferated throughout Cold War arsenals. The combination sensors and delayed arming mechanisms pioneered during the Pacific Campaign appeared in conflicts from the Baltic to Southeast Asia. Despite its devastating effectiveness, the mining campaign received little public recognition. No dramatic gun camera footage recorded ships sinking at night. No celebrated aces emerged from mine-laying missions. The absence of visible destruction made poor propaganda compared to daylight carrier strikes and bombing raids. Veterans of mining missions received minimal recognition compared to bomber crews attacking cities. Combat points awarded for mining operations were lower than those for bombing raids, despite their greater strategic impact. The mathematical precision required for effective mining lacked the glamour associated with aerial combat. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey concluded that Japan faced destruction through multiple causes. Economic strangulation through import interruption proved as significant as direct bombing damage. Their most significant findings suggested Japan would have surrendered even without atomic bombs, Russian entry, or planned invasions. Japanese assessments captured after the war revealed the mining campaign's decisive impact. By July 1945, remaining shipping capacity was devoted exclusively to food and salt imports. Industrial raw materials had been abandoned entirely. This decision guaranteed economic collapse regardless of other military developments. Statistical analysis demonstrates the campaign's remarkable efficiency. Mining operations consumed only 5.7% of total B29 efforts, while destroying 63% of Japan's remaining merchant fleet. Each ton of mines sunk 137 tons of shipping. No other weapon system achieved comparable cost-effectiveness ratios during the Pacific War. The human tragedy extended beyond immediate casualties. Families of merchant sailors faced particular anguish, since mining deaths seemed random and meaningless. Unlike combat fatalities carrying honor, mine victims appeared to die by chance while performing civilian duties. Official notifications provided no comfort, stating simply that loved ones were lost at sea. Medical consequences multiplied as shortages spread. Diseases of poverty reappeared that hadn't been seen since the 19th century. Beriberi from vitamin deficiency. tuberculosis spreading through weakened populations, children with severe malnutrition, while adults wasted away from starvation. Urban populations suffered malnutrition comparable to medieval famines. The campaign's psychological impact proved as significant as its physical destruction. Japanese coastal residents watched ships exploding in supposedly safe waters. The randomness and helplessness against an unseen enemy created unique terror. Citizens understood that their nation was dying, but couldn't identify the specific cause. Educational systems collapsed as schools closed for lack of heating fuel. Teachers couldn't reach classrooms when transportation systems failed. Students became too weak from hunger to attend lessons even when schools remained open. The lunch programs that provided children's only reliable meals ended completely by May 1945. Cultural preservation became impossible when survival demanded immediate attention. Museums closed when heating systems failed. Libraries burned books for fuel. Art treasures were traded for food. The social institutions that defined Japanese civilization crumbled under the pressure of systematic resource denial. Agricultural production couldn't compensate for lost imports. Japan's mountainous terrain limited arable land to small percentages of total area. Domestic food production had never supported the entire population without supplemental imports. The mining campaign eliminated these essential supplements precisely when they were most needed. Religious institutions found themselves powerless to provide traditional comfort. Buddhist temples couldn't heat worship halls. Shinto shrines lacked resources for seasonal festivals. Religious leaders watched their communities disperse as families fled cities seeking food in rural areas. Spiritual guidance seemed inadequate when basic survival was at stake. The Japanese government's rationing systems collapsed under the strain. Distribution networks depended on transportation systems that no longer functioned reliably. Ration cards became worthless when supplies never arrived. Black market prices reached astronomical levels as desperation replaced normal economic relationships. Scientific and technological development ceased entirely. Research institutions closed when equipment couldn't be maintained. Universities dismissed faculty and students. The intellectual infrastructure that had supported Japan's rapid modernization disappeared as survival took precedence over advancement. International communications became increasingly difficult. Diplomatic pouches couldn't cross mined waters. Embassy communications depended on unreliable radio transmissions. Japan's isolation became complete as the mining campaign severed even neutral contacts with the outside world. The weather provided no relief from the crisis. Summer heat made food preservation impossible without refrigeration systems that required fuel. Seasonal typhoons disrupted the few remaining transportation links. Traditional fishing seasons became meaningless when boats couldn't safely leave harbors. Urban planning concepts became obsolete when cities couldn't function. Sewage systems failed without transportation for maintenance supplies. Garbage collection stopped when fuel became unavailable. Water treatment plants closed when chemical supplies couldn't be delivered. Modern urban life reverted to medieval conditions within months. Captain Tamura's post-war testimony provided the most accurate assessment of the campaign's impact. The man who commanded Japan's entire mine-sweeping effort admitted that aerial mining had effectively starved the country. His professional judgment carried particular weight since he understood both the weapons and Japan's failed countermeasures. Emperor Hirohito's surrender speech referenced the nation's inability to continue fighting. Behind that diplomatic language lay empty stomachs, cold factories, and idle shipyards. The mining campaign had accomplished what conventional bombing couldn't achieve: complete economic paralysis of an island nation dependent on maritime commerce. Prince Konoe's observation that aerial mining proved equally effective as industrial bombing understated the true comparison. Mining operations achieved greater strategic impact with significantly fewer resources and lower casualties. The invisible nature of the threat made it more psychologically devastating than visible destruction. The campaign demonstrated that modern warfare's most effective weapons might be those the enemy never sees. Visible destruction could be repaired and countered. Invisible threats created helplessness and despair that undermined both military capability and civilian morale. The mines accomplished strategic victory through systematic resource denial rather than dramatic destruction. Operation Starvation's legacy extended far beyond World War II. The precision aerial mining techniques developed during the campaign influenced naval warfare concepts for decades. Every major navy studied the results and incorporated similar capabilities into their arsenals. The technology proliferated worldwide, appearing in conflicts throughout the Cold War period. The 670 ships destroyed by mining operations represented more than statistical victories. Each vessel lost removed essential supplies from Japanese society. Food never reached hungry families. Coal never fueled factories. Medicine never reached hospitals. Raw materials never reached production facilities. The cumulative impact strangled an entire civilization. In the end, Japan surrendered not primarily to superior firepower, but to superior logistics planning. The Americans had identified Japan's critical vulnerability and exploited it with devastating effectiveness. The mining campaign proved that island nations dependent on imports could be defeated by severing their maritime lifelines. The Japanese never fully understood what had destroyed them until after the war ended. Many mining losses were attributed to other causes. The scope of the aerial mining program remained classified. Even Captain Tamura didn't realize that over 12,000 mines had been laid until post-war interrogations revealed American planning documents. This invisibility represented the campaign's greatest strength. Japan couldn't effectively counter threats they didn't fully comprehend. Resources devoted to conventional air defense couldn't protect against mines already planted. The weapons continued killing long after their delivery aircraft had returned to base. The mining campaign achieved Admiral Nimitz's strategic objective. Japan's maritime commerce was completely paralyzed by August 1945. The nation that had launched the Pacific War with dreams of empire couldn't feed its capital city. The sea that had carried Japanese expansion now carried only death for Japanese shipping. The ultimate irony was that Japan's greatest strength became her fatal weakness. The maritime skills that had enabled rapid territorial expansion made the nation vulnerable to systematic mining campaigns. The same waters that had carried Japanese conquest now prevented Japanese survival. Operation Starvation stands as history's most successful example of strategic economic warfare. In 5 months, a small number of aircraft accomplished what years of conventional bombing couldn't achieve: the complete paralysis of an industrial nation's ability to sustain itself. The campaign proved that wars could be won by destroying the enemy's capacity to fight rather than fighting the enemy directly.